A lady's victory. Lady Catherine of Dunmere had once believed Sir Tristan de Clare was the most honorable of men until she found him standing beside her father's murderer. Later, when he caught her alone, his voice was raw with something close to regret. "You think I have betrayed you," he murmured. "But tell me, my lady, what would you have done in my place?" Chapter 1. The Serpent in the Garden. The scent of roses, heavy and sweet, usually soothed Lady Catherine of Dunmere. Today, however, the perfume felt cloying, a suffocating blanket over the meticulously manicured gardens of Dunmere Castle. The sun, a molten orb in the late summer sky, beat down upon her velvet gown, the deep emerald hue a stark contrast to the pallor of her skin. Her fingers, usually nimble with embroidery needle or lute strings, now twisted the delicate silver filigree of her belt, a nervous habit she'd thought long conquered. Just hours ago, this garden had been a sanctuary. Now, it felt like a gilded cage, the beauty a cruel mockery of the turmoil that raged within her. She could still hear the shouts, the clash of steel, the horrifying, wet thud that had silenced her father's booming laughter forever. Lord Edmund of Dunmere, a man who had seemed as immovable and enduring as the ancient oaks that bordered his lands, had fallen. Not in glorious battle, as befitting a warrior of his stature, but in his own courtyard, struck down by a treacherous blade. Catherine pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quell the frantic fluttering of her heart. She had seen it, a nightmare unfolding before her very eyes. The king's envoy, Lord Ashworth, a man with eyes as cold and grey as the castle stones, had arrived with his retinue, ostensibly to discuss a border dispute with a neighboring lord. Her father, ever the gracious host, had welcomed them with open arms, offering the hospitality of Dunmere without reservation. And among Ashworth's men, standing tall and proud, his dark hair gleaming in the sunlight, had been Sir Tristan de Clare. Tristan. The name, once a whisper of warmth and secret smiles, now felt like a shard of ice lodged in her throat. He had been her father's most trusted knight, a man who had sworn oaths of fealty on the very relics that now lay cold in the castle chapel. He had been more. Their meetings, stolen moments in the moonlit orchard, the whispered promises, the shared dreams of a future woven together like the threads of a rich tapestry, all of it now lay in shattered fragments around her. She had watched, frozen in horror, as Lord Ashworth, with a smile that never reached his eyes, had drawn his sword. The movement had been swift, unexpected, a viper's strike in the midst of polite conversation. Her father had barely had time to react before the blade had found its mark, plunging deep into his chest. And Tristan had stood there. He hadn't moved to help. He hadn't raised his own sword in defense of the man he had sworn to protect. He had simply watched, his face an unreadable mask, as Lord Edmund crumpled to the ground, the crimson stains spreading across his tunic like a grotesque, blossoming flower. Catherine squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image, the memory, but it was seared onto the back of her eyelids. She could still smell the metallic tang of blood mingling with the sweet scent of roses. The screams of the castle servants, the panicked cries of her younger brother, Thomas, echoed in her ears. When the chaos had subsided, when the murderers had ridden away, their dark purpose accomplished, Catherine had found herself alone with Tristan. He had intercepted her as she stumbled towards the stables, her mind a whirlwind of grief and fury, intending to ride after them, to avenge her father, to do something, anything, to ease the unbearable pain. He had caught her arm, his grip surprisingly gentle. His eyes, usually the warm brown of rich earth, were now dark pools, reflecting a torment she wouldn't understand. Catherine, he had begun, his voice raw, almost a whisper. She had wrenched her arm free, her voice trembling with rage and betrayal. "Do not speak my name, traitor." He had flinched, as if she had struck him. "You think I have betrayed you," he murmured, the words heavy with a sorrow that felt utterly foreign, utterly false. He stepped closer, and she recoiled, the scent of leather and steel that had once been so comforting now a suffocating reminder of his perfidy. "But tell me, my lady," he continued, his voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. What would you have done in my place? The question had hung in the air, unanswered, unanswerable. He had let her go then, turning away with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world on his broad shoulders. She had watched him walk away, his back ramrod straight, his posture a strange blend of defiance and defeat. Now, hours later, standing amidst the roses that had once been their shared sanctuary, Catherine replayed his words in her mind. What would you have done in my place? The question was a cruel barb, twisting in her heart. She had no answer. She only knew that the man she had thought she loved, the man she had believed to be the epitome of honor and loyalty, had stood by and watched her father die. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, guttural sound that startled a nearby thrush into flight. She sank onto a stone bench, the cold seeping through her gown, a chilling reminder of the emptiness that now consumed her. Dunmere was hers now, hers and Thomas's. But the weight of responsibility felt crushing, the future a bleak and uncertain landscape. She looked up at the sky, the vibrant blue now fading to a bruised purple as dusk began to settle. The first stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant, offering no comfort. She had to be strong. For Thomas, for Dunmere, for her father's memory. But how could she be strong when her heart felt like a shattered vase, its precious contents spilled and lost forever? The sound of footsteps on the gravel path made her jump. She turned, her hand instinctively going to the small dagger she kept hidden in the folds of her skirt. It was only Alara, her lady-in-waiting, her face etched with worry. "My lady," Alara said softly, her voice filled with concern. "You should not be out here alone. It is not safe." Catherine shook her head, unable to speak. Safe? Nothing felt safe anymore. The world she had known, the world of order and security, had been ripped apart, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty and fear. Alara knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in her own. "Come, my lady," she urged gently. "Let us go inside. You need to rest." Catherine allowed herself to be led back towards the castle, her steps heavy and reluctant. The great hall, usually a place of warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty, haunted by the ghost of her father's presence. The servants moved about quietly, their faces somber, their eyes avoiding hers. As she climbed the stairs to her chamber, a single thought echoed in her mind, a bitter refrain that offered no solace, only the cold, hard truth of her new reality. Tristan de Clare, the man she had loved, was a traitor. And she, Catherine of Dunmere, was alone. The weight of that loneliness, heavy and suffocating as the scent of the dying roses, threatened to crush her completely. Chapter 2. A vow bathed in blood. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls of Catherine's chamber, turning familiar objects into monstrous shapes. Sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of her father's lifeless body, the crimson stain on his tunic, the look of shocked surprise on his face, flashed before her. She tossed and turned in the large, ornate bed, the fine linen sheets feeling like rough sackcloth against her skin. Alara had tried to soothe her, offering warm milk laced with honey and chamomile, but nothing could ease the turmoil within her. The events of the day replayed in her mind, a relentless cycle of grief, anger, and betrayal. And always at the center of it all was Tristan. His question, "What would you have done in my place?" echoed in her ears, a constant, tormenting refrain. She tried to push it away, to dismiss it as the excuse of a traitor, but it lingered, a nagging doubt that refused to be silenced. She rose from the bed, unable to bear the confines of the room any longer. The cold stone floor chilled her bare feet as she walked to the window, drawing back the heavy velvet curtains. The moon, a silver crescent in the inky sky, cast a pale light over the castle grounds. Below, the guards patrolled the walls, their torches flickering like fireflies in the darkness. Everything looked the same, yet everything had changed. The world she had known, the world of security and stability, had been shattered, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She was now Lady of Dunmere, responsible for the welfare of her people, for the defense of her lands. The thought was overwhelming. She remembered her father's words, spoken to her just weeks before, as they had ridden through the fields surrounding the castle. "Catherine," he had said, his voice gruff but filled with affection, "you are strong. You have the heart of a lioness. Never forget that." He had always believed in her, even when she had doubted herself. He had seen a strength in her that she had often struggled to find. Now, more than ever, she needed to find that strength, to live up to his expectations, to honor his memory. But how could she do that when her heart was so broken? How could she lead her people when she felt so lost and alone? A sudden sound, a faint scratching at the door, startled her. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "It is I, my lady," came the muffled reply. "Thomas." Relief washed over her. She hurried to the door, unbolting it to reveal her younger brother, his face pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He was only 12 years old, too young to have to face such a loss, such a burden. He rushed into her arms, burying his face in her shoulder. "Catherine," he sobbed.
"I'm scared."
She held him tight, stroking his hair, trying to offer comfort, even though her own heart felt like a leaden weight in her chest. "I know, Thomas," she whispered. "I know. But we will be strong. Together." They stood there for a long time, clinging to each other, finding solace in their shared grief. Finally, Thomas pulled away, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "What will happen now?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Catherine took a deep breath, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "We will carry on," she said. "We will honor Father's memory. We will protect Dunmere." "But Lord Ashworth," he said. Thomas hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. "He said that Father was a traitor, that he was plotting against the king." Catherine's blood ran cold. She had heard the accusations, the lies that Ashworth had spread to justify his heinous act. But to hear them repeated by her young brother, to see the fear in his eyes, filled her with a renewed surge of anger. "That is a lie, Thomas," she said firmly. "Your father was a loyal and honorable man. He would never betray the king." "But Tristan, he was with them," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. "He didn't stop them." Catherine's heart clenched. There it was again, the name that haunted her, the betrayal that cut her to the core. "We will not speak of him," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "But no, Thomas," she interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "He is a traitor. He is dead to us." She knew it was a harsh thing to say, especially to a young boy who had once looked up to Tristan as a hero. But she couldn't bear to hear his name, to think of the man he had been, the man she had thought she loved. She led Thomas to the bed, sitting beside him, holding his hand. "We will face this together, Thomas," she said, her voice softer now. "We will find out the truth. We will clear Father's name. And we will make those who wronged us pay." Her words were a vow, a promise made in the darkness of the night, a vow bathed in the blood of her father and the tears of her brother. She didn't know how she would do it, but she would find a way. She would find the strength, the courage, to fight for justice, for her family, for Dunmere. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the window, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Catherine looked at her brother, his face now calm and peaceful in sleep. A fierce determination filled her heart. She would not be broken. She would not be defeated. She would rise from the ashes of her grief and become the leader her people needed, the warrior her father had always believed her to be. The serpent had struck, but the lioness was ready to roar. And her roar would be heard throughout the land, a cry for justice, a promise of vengeance. The memory of Tristan's face, however, the sorrow deep in his eyes, the question that still lingered remained lodged in her mind, unsettling, and refused to be fully extinguished, like a stubborn ember in the hearth, refusing to be cooled by the winds of her rage. She pushed it down, far down, and focused on the task ahead. Chapter 3. Whispers of Treachery. The days following Lord Edmund's death were a blur of activity, a whirlwind of preparations and pronouncements. Catherine, still reeling from the shock and grief, found herself thrust into the role of leader, forced to make decisions, to give orders, to navigate the treacherous currents of courtly politics. The funeral was a somber affair, held in the castle chapel, the air thick with incense and the mournful chants of the priests. Catherine stood beside Thomas, her hand resting on his shoulder, trying to project an image of strength and composure, even as her heart ached with a pain so profound it felt like a physical wound. The lords and ladies of the neighboring estates came to pay their respects, their faces a mixture of sympathy and veiled curiosity. Catherine received them with a cool formality, her eyes scanning their faces, searching for any sign of insincerity, any hint of complicity in her father's murder. She knew that many of them were secretly wondering if the accusations against her father were true. Whispers of treachery had spread like wildfire, fueled by Lord Ashworth's carefully crafted lies. The king had sent a terse message, expressing his condolences, but also demanding a full accounting of Dunmere's affairs, a clear indication that he suspected Catherine's father of plotting against him. The weight of suspicion, the constant scrutiny, was almost unbearable. Catherine felt like she was walking on eggshells, every word, every action, carefully calculated to avoid giving any further credence to the rumors. She spent hours poring over her father's documents, searching for any clue, any evidence that could prove his innocence. But the records were meticulous, revealing nothing more than the day-to-day management of the estate. There was no mention of any secret dealings, any conspiracy against the king. She questioned the castle servants, the guards, the members of her father's council, but they all swore to his loyalty, their voices filled with genuine shock and disbelief at the accusations. One evening, as she sat alone in her father's study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls, she came across a small, locked chest hidden beneath a pile of ledgers. Her heart quickened with anticipation. She had never seen this chest before. Could it contain the answers she was seeking? She summoned the castle blacksmith, a burly man named Gareth, who had served her father for many years. He arrived quickly, his face etched with concern. "My lady," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. "Is there trouble?"
Catherine pointed to the chest.
"Gareth, can you open this for me? I do not have the key." Gareth examined the lock, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It is an old lock, my lady," he said, "but I believe I can manage it." He worked carefully, his skilled hands manipulating the tools with practiced ease. After a few tense minutes, there was a click, and the lid of the chest sprang open. Catherine held her breath, her eyes fixed on the contents of the chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a rolled-up parchment, tied with a silken ribbon. With trembling hands, she reached for the parchment, her heart pounding in her chest. She carefully untied the ribbon and unrolled the scroll. The parchment was old and brittle, the ink faded in places. As she began to read, her eyes widened in disbelief. The document was a letter, written in her father's hand, addressed to a man named Lord Elmsworth, a powerful nobleman known for his opposition to the king. The letter spoke of a secret alliance, a plan to overthrow the king and replace him with a new ruler, one who would be more sympathetic to the needs of the northern lords. Catherine's blood ran cold. The letter was damning, a clear confirmation of the accusations against her father. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. She read the letter again, her mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. Could it be true? Could her father, the man she had always believed to be the epitome of honor and loyalty, have been involved in such a treacherous plot? She looked up at Gareth, who was watching her with a concerned expression. "Gareth," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "did you know anything about this?" The blacksmith shook his head, his face a mask of confusion. "No, my lady," he said. "I swear on my life, I knew nothing of this." Lord Edmund would never, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Catherine believed him. She had known Gareth all her life, and she trusted him implicitly. But the letter was undeniable. She felt a surge of despair, a crushing weight of disappointment. Her father's reputation, his legacy, was in ruins, and she, as his heir, would be tainted by his treachery. She carefully rolled up the parchment, placing it back in the chest. She needed time to think, to decide what to do. She couldn't show this letter to anyone, not yet. It would be too dangerous. "Gareth," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "Thank you for your help. You may go." The blacksmith bowed and left the room, closing the door behind him. Catherine sank into her father's chair, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She felt betrayed, not only by Tristan, but by her own father. The foundations of her world, already shaken by his death, were now crumbling around her. She closed her eyes, trying to gather her thoughts, to find a way forward. But the only thing she could think of was Tristan's question, the one that had haunted her since that fateful day. "What would you have done in my place?" Now, faced with the evidence of her father's own betrayal, the question took on a new, even more troubling dimension. And a flicker, so small it was almost imperceptible, of understanding for his position sparked within her. She buried it immediately. There was no room for such thoughts, but it had been there, and that in itself was terrifying. Chapter 4. The Falcon and the Dove. The summons arrived the next morning, delivered by a royal messenger, his face stern and unyielding. Catherine was to present herself at court within the fortnight, to answer the charges against her father and to swear fealty to the king. The news sent a ripple of fear and apprehension through the castle. The servants whispered among themselves, their eyes darting nervously towards Catherine whenever she passed. Even Thomas, usually so resilient, seemed subdued, his youthful exuberance replaced by a quiet anxiety. Catherine knew that she had no choice but to obey the summons. To refuse would be seen as an admission of guilt, a confirmation of the king's suspicions. But she also knew that she was walking into a trap, a den of vipers where her every word, every gesture, would be scrutinized, twisted, and used against her. She spent the next few days preparing for her journey, selecting her escort, gathering her documents, and steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. She chose Sir Gareth, the blacksmith, and a handful of her most trusted guards to accompany her. She knew she could rely on their loyalty, their discretion. She also decided to take Alara, her lady-in-waiting, with her. Alara was not only a close friend and confidant but also a shrewd observer, with a keen understanding of courtly intrigue. Her presence would be invaluable, a source of comfort and guidance in the treacherous world she was about to enter. On the morning of their departure, Catherine stood on the castle steps, watching as her small entourage assembled in the courtyard below. The sun was just rising, casting a golden glow over the landscape, but the beauty of the morning did little to ease the knot of apprehension in her stomach. She looked up at the sky, where a lone falcon circled high above, its sharp eyes scanning the ground below. The falcon, a symbol of power and nobility, had always been her father's favorite bird. She remembered him telling her stories of falconry, of the skill and patience required to train these magnificent creatures. She wished she had her father's wisdom, his guidance, to help her navigate the challenges ahead. But she was alone, forced to rely on her own instincts, her own strength. As she descended the steps, she noticed a small figure standing at the edge of the courtyard, watching her with an intensity that made her uneasy. It was a young woman, a stranger, dressed in a simple gray gown, her face partially hidden by a hood. Catherine paused, her eyes meeting the woman's. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at her memory, but she couldn't place it.
"Who are you?"
Catherine asked, her voice cautious. The woman stepped forward, her hood falling back to reveal a face that was both beautiful and haunting. Her eyes, a striking shade of emerald green, were filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And I have come to help you." Catherine frowned, her suspicions aroused. "Help me?"
"How?"
Lyra glanced around, as if to make sure they were not being overheard. "I know things, my lady," she said. "Things about your father, about Lord Ashworth, about Sir Tristan." Catherine's heart quickened. Tristan's name, spoken by this mysterious woman, sent a shiver down her spine. "What things?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes locking with Catherine's. "I know that your father was not a traitor," she said. "And I know that Sir Tristan is not who you think he is." Catherine's mind reeled. Could it be true? Could this woman, this stranger, hold the key to unlocking the truth, to clearing her father's name, to understanding Tristan's actions? She hesitated, torn between hope and disbelief. She had been betrayed so many times, her trust shattered, her world turned upside down. Could she afford to trust this woman, this stranger who appeared out of nowhere, offering her a glimmer of hope in the darkness? "Why should I believe you?" Catherine asked, her voice sharp.
Lyra smiled, a sad, knowing smile.
"Because I have nothing to gain by lying to you, my lady," she said. "And because I know the truth. And the truth, as they say, will set you free." She held out a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Take this," she said. "It contains proof. But do not open it until you are safely away from Dunmere. And be careful, my lady. There are those who would do anything to keep the truth hidden." Catherine reached out, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth wood of the box. She felt a strange sense of connection to this woman, a feeling of trust that defied logic.
"Who are you?"
Catherine asked again, her voice filled with a newfound curiosity. Lyra smiled enigmatically. "I am a friend, my lady," she said. "A friend of your father's. And a friend of the truth." With those words, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the castle walls as quickly as she had appeared. Catherine stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where Lyra had stood, the wooden box clutched tightly in her hand. She felt a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness that had enveloped her. She didn't know who Lyra was or why she had come to her, but she knew that she had to trust her instincts. She had to believe that there was a chance, however slim, that she could clear her father's name, that she could uncover the truth about Tristan. As she mounted her horse, the wooden box tucked safely away in her saddlebag, Catherine looked up at the sky again. The falcon was still there, circling high above, a silent witness to her departure. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. She was no longer just a grieving daughter, a betrayed lover. She was the Lady of Dunmere, a falcon ready to take flight, a dove carrying the hope of peace and justice. And she would not rest until she had found both. The unsettling knowledge of her father's letter, however, weighed heavily in her heart, a stark counterpoint to the hope Lyra had offered. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Fallen. The journey to the royal court was long and arduous, the landscape mirroring the turmoil in Catherine's heart. The rolling hills and verdant fields of Dunmere gradually gave way to rugged mountains and dense forests, the air growing colder, the atmosphere more oppressive. Catherine rode in silence, her mind preoccupied with the events of the past few weeks, with the mysterious Lyra and the wooden box she carried, with the impending confrontation with the king. She tried to focus on the task ahead, on preparing her defense, on proving her father's innocence, but her thoughts kept returning to Tristan. She couldn't shake the image of him standing beside Lord Ashworth, his face an unreadable mask, as her father was struck down. She couldn't forget his words, his question, the raw emotion in his voice. "What would you have done in my place?" She had tried to dismiss him as a traitor, to erase him from her memory, but he lingered, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. And now, with Lyra's words echoing in her mind, "Sir Tristan is not who you think he is," she felt a growing sense of unease, a nagging doubt that she had misjudged him. She glanced at Alara, who rode beside her, her face etched with concern. "Alara," Catherine said, her voice low, "do you believe it is possible? That Tristan, that he was not involved in my father's death?" Alara hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought.
"I do not know, my lady," she said.
"He was your father's most trusted knight. He swore oaths of fealty. It is difficult to believe that he would betray him so easily." "But he stood there," Catherine said, her voice tight with emotion. "He did nothing." "Perhaps he had no choice," Alara said softly. "Perhaps he was under orders." Or perhaps there is more to the story than we know. Catherine nodded, her mind racing. She knew that Alara was right. There were too many unanswered questions, too many inconsistencies. She had to find out the truth, not only for her father's sake, but for her own. As they rode deeper into the forest, the shadows grew longer, the air heavier. Catherine felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that they were being watched. She scanned the trees, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. Suddenly, a group of armed men emerged from the woods, blocking their path. They were dressed in rough clothing, their faces hidden by masks. Bandits, Catherine realized, her heart pounding in her chest.
Halt!
The leader of the bandits shouted, his voice gruff. Hand over your valuables, and we might let you live. Catherine's guards drew their swords, ready to defend themselves. But they were outnumbered, surrounded by the bandits. Catherine knew that they were in a dangerous situation. She had to think quickly, to find a way to protect her people, to avoid bloodshed. We are on a mission for the king, Catherine said, her voice firm and clear. We carry important documents. If you harm us, you will face the king's wrath. The bandit leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. The king?
He scoffed.
The king cares nothing for the likes of you. He has more important things to worry about. He stepped closer, his eyes glinting menacingly. Now hand over your valuables or face the consequences. Catherine knew that she couldn't reason with these men. They were desperate, driven by greed and violence. She had to find another way. She remembered the wooden box, the one Lyra had given her. She had no idea what it contained, but she had a feeling that it might be her only hope. Wait, she said, her voice calm despite the fear that gripped her. I have something here that might interest you. Something of great value. She reached into her saddlebag, her hand closing around the wooden box. She slowly withdrew it, holding it out for the bandit leader to see. The bandit leader's eyes widened in surprise. He recognized the box, the intricate carvings, the symbol of a hidden order, a secret society known for its power and influence. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice now filled with a mixture of awe and fear. Catherine smiled, a knowing smile.
That is not important, she said.
What is important is that this box contains something that you need. Something that can give you power, wealth, beyond your wildest dreams. The bandit leader hesitated, his eyes darting between Catherine and the box. He was intrigued, tempted by the promise of riches. Let us see it, he said, his voice gruff. Catherine shook her head. Not here, she said. We need to go somewhere private, somewhere safe, where we can discuss this transaction. The bandit leader considered her offer, his mind weighing the risks and rewards. Finally, he nodded. Very well, he said. We will go to our camp. But if this is a trick, you will pay dearly. Catherine breathed a sigh of relief. She had bought herself some time, a chance to escape, to find a way to use the contents of the box to her advantage. As they followed the bandits deeper into the forest, Catherine glanced back at her guards, her eyes conveying a silent message. Be ready. Be vigilant. The shadows of the fallen, the secrets they held, were about to be revealed. And she, the Lady of Dunmere, would be the one to bring them to light, even as she prayed it wouldn't consume her and all she held dear in the process. The fear that the bandits recognized the box and knew more than she did was a cold weight in her heart. Chapter 6. The Price of Loyalty. The bandit camp was a crude collection of tents and lean TOS, hidden deep within the forest. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. Catherine and her companions were led to a large tent in the center of the camp, where the bandit leader awaited them. He sat on a makeshift throne, a rough-hewn log covered with animal skins. He gestured for Catherine to approach, his eyes fixed on the wooden box she still clutched in her hand. Now, he said, his voice gruff. Show me what you have. Catherine hesitated. She still didn't know what the box contained, but she knew that it was valuable, powerful enough to have intimidated the bandit leader. She had to be careful, to use it to her advantage. Before I show you, she said, her voice calm and steady, I need to know who you are, and why you recognize this box. The bandit leader chuckled, a dry, humorless sound.
My name is not important, he said.
But I will tell you this. I am a member of the Order of the Shadowed Blade. And this box, he pointed to the wooden box in Catherine's hand, is one of our sacred relics. It contains the key to unlocking a great power. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. The Order of the Shadowed Blade. She had heard whispers of this secret society, rumors of their influence, their ruthlessness. They were said to be involved in all manner of clandestine activities, from political assassinations to smuggling, even treason. And what is this great power? Catherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. The bandit leader leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. It is the power to control the shadows, he said. To command the forces of darkness. To shape the destiny of the kingdom. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. This was more dangerous than she had imagined. She was dealing with a group of fanatics, obsessed with power and willing to do anything to achieve it. And what do you want with this power? Catherine asked. The bandit leader smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. We want to restore order to the kingdom, he said. To overthrow the corrupt and weak king. To establish a new rule, a rule of strength and justice. Catherine's mind raced. This was the same rhetoric that Lord Ashworth had used to justify her father's murder. Could there be a connection? Could the Order of the Shadowed Blade be behind the plot against her father? And what makes you think that I would help you? Catherine asked, her voice challenging. The bandit leader shrugged. You have the box, he said. That makes you one of us. Whether you like it or not. Catherine knew that she was in a precarious situation. She was surrounded by enemies, caught in a web of intrigue and conspiracy. She had to find a way to escape, to warn the king, to expose the Order of the Shadowed Blade. I need time to think, she said, her voice firm. I need to consider your offer. The bandit leader frowned, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. You have until dawn, he said. Then you will make your decision. Join us, or face the consequences. He gestured to his men, who escorted Catherine and her companions to a smaller tent, where they were to be held captive. As soon as they were alone, Catherine turned to Alara and Gareth. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice urgent. These men are dangerous. They are part of the Order of the Shadowed Blade, the same group that may be behind my father's murder. Gareth nodded, his face grim. We will fight our way out, my lady, he said. We will protect you. Catherine shook her head.
No, she said.
We are outnumbered. We would be killed. We need to find another way. She looked at the wooden box, still clutched in her hand. She had to open it to see what it contained. It was her only hope. With trembling hands, she carefully opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft velvet, lay a single object, a silver ring, engraved with the symbol of a falcon and a dove intertwined. Catherine gasped. She recognized the ring. It was her father's. He had always worn it, a symbol of his marriage to her mother, a symbol of their love and loyalty. But what was it doing here? In a box belonging to the Order of the Shadowed Blade? She examined the ring more closely, turning it over in her hand. She noticed a small inscription on the inside of the band, Fides et Amor, faith and love. Suddenly, a memory flashed through her mind. She remembered a conversation she had had with her father years ago when she was a young girl. He had shown her the ring, telling her the story of how he had met her mother, how they had fallen in love, how he had sworn to protect her, to be faithful to her, always. He had also told her something else, something that she had forgotten until now. He had told her that he was a member of a secret society, a group dedicated to protecting the kingdom from its enemies. He had called it the Order of the Falcon and the Dove. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest. Could it be? Could her father have been a member of a rival order, an order opposed to the Shadowed Blade? Was that why he had been murdered? She looked at Alara and Gareth, her eyes filled with a new understanding. My father was not a traitor, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. He was a hero. He was fighting against the Order of the Shadowed Blade. And they killed him for it. Alara and Gareth stared at her, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. But they also saw the truth in her eyes, the conviction in her voice. "We need to get this ring to the king," Catherine said. "It is proof of my father's innocence. It is proof of the shadowed blade's treachery." But how? They were prisoners, surrounded by enemies. They had no weapons, no way to escape. Suddenly, Catherine remembered Tristan's question, the one that had haunted her for so long. "What would you have done in my place?" She finally understood. She understood the impossible choice he must have faced, the loyalty he must have felt to her father, the danger he must have been in. She looked at the ring, the symbol of faith and love. She knew what she had to do. She had to trust. She had to have faith. And she had to find a way to reach Tristan, to tell him the truth, to ask for his help. It was a desperate gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown. But it was the only chance she had. And, staring into the flickering firelight, she knew she would take it. The price of loyalty was steep, but the price of betrayal was far greater. Chapter 7. A Dance of Deception. The hours before dawn crawled by with agonizing slowness. Catherine, Alara, and Gareth huddled together in the tent, whispering plans, weighing options, each more desperate than the last. The ring, heavy with its newfound significance, felt like a burning coal in Catherine's palm. She knew she had to get a message to Tristan. But how? She was a prisoner, surrounded by enemies, with no way to communicate with the outside world. The bandits were watchful, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, their hands never far from their weapons. As the first hint of gray lightened the sky, Catherine made a decision. She would use the bandit leader's arrogance, his belief in her naivete, against him. She would play the part of the grieving, vulnerable noblewoman, eager to please, willing to be swayed. It was a dangerous game, a dance of deception, but it was her only chance. When the bandit leader summoned her to his tent, Catherine went willingly, her head held high, her demeanor carefully composed. She had hidden the ring beneath her gown, its presence a constant reminder of her father's legacy, of her mission. "Have you made your decision, Lady Dunmere?" the bandit leader asked, his voice laced with a hint of mockery. Catherine met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I have," she said, her voice steady. "I understand the importance of your cause. My father, he was a complicated man. Perhaps he was misguided." She allowed a hint of doubt, a tremor of vulnerability, to enter her voice. The bandit leader seemed to believe her, his eyes lighting up with satisfaction. "I am willing to consider joining your order," Catherine continued, her voice carefully measured. "But I need to understand more. I need to be sure that this is the right path." The bandit leader leaned back, a smug smile on his face. "Of course, my lady," he said. "We will be happy to enlighten you. We will show you the true power of the Shadow Blade." He gestured to a chair beside him. "Sit, my lady, and let us discuss the future." Catherine sat, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to be careful, to choose her words wisely, to gain his trust without revealing her true intentions. "Tell me," she said, her voice soft and inquisitive, "about your plans, about how you intend to restore order to the kingdom." The bandit leader began to speak, his voice filled with a fanatical fervor. He spoke of their plans to overthrow the king, to assassinate his advisors, to install a new ruler, one who would be sympathetic to their cause. He spoke of their network of spies and informants, their control over key members of the court, their power to manipulate events from the shadows. As he spoke, Catherine listened intently, her mind racing, piecing together the fragments of information, confirming her suspicions. The Order of the Shadowed Blade was indeed behind her father's murder. They were the ones who had spread the lies, who had framed him as a traitor. And Tristan was caught in the middle of it all. She still didn't know his true allegiance, but she knew that he was in danger, that he was playing a dangerous game. "And what of Sir Tristan de Clare?" Catherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. "He was my father's friend. Where does he stand in all of this?" The bandit leader's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Sir Tristan," he said, his voice carefully guarded, "is a valuable asset. He has access to the king, to the court. He provides us with information. But is he loyal?" Catherine pressed, her heart pounding. The bandit leader hesitated, his eyes searching hers. Loyalty is a fluid concept, my lady, he said. Especially in these times. Sir Tristan, he understands the importance of our cause. He knows that the king is weak, that he must be replaced. Catherine felt a surge of hope, a glimmer of belief that Tristan was not a traitor, that he was working against the shadowed blade from within. But she couldn't be sure. She needed more information. I would like to speak with him, Catherine said, her voice firm. I need to hear from him directly. I need to understand his position. The bandit leader frowned, his eyes hardening. That is not possible, my lady, he said. Sir Tristan is unavailable. Catherine knew that she had pushed him as far as she could. She had to change her tactics. Very well, she said, her voice yielding. I understand. But I need to be sure before I commit myself fully to your cause. I need to see proof of your power, of your influence. The bandit leader smiled, his confidence restored. Of course, my lady, he said. We will show you. We will show you the true power of the shadowed blade. He clapped his hands, and 2 of his men entered the tent, carrying a small, bound figure. They threw the figure to the ground at Catherine's feet. Catherine gasped. It was a young woman, her face bruised and bloodied, her clothes torn. It was Lyra. This woman, the bandit leader said, his voice cold and menacing, was caught spying on us. She claims to be a friend of yours. Catherine's heart sank. Lyra, the woman who had warned her, who had given her the wooden box, had been captured. She is nothing to me, Catherine said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the lie. She had to protect Lyra, to find a way to save her. But how? She was trapped, surrounded by enemies, with no way to escape. We will interrogate her, the bandit leader said, his voice cruel. And she will tell us everything she knows. About you. About your father. About your plans. Catherine knew that Lyra was in danger, that she would be tortured, possibly killed. She had to do something, anything, to save her. But as she looked at the bandit leader's cold, merciless eyes, she knew that she was running out of time. And the dance of deception she had so carefully orchestrated was about to come to a crashing and potentially deadly end. Chapter 8. Beneath a Sky of Stone. The journey from the bandit camp to the capital was a stark contrast to the relative freedom, however fraught, of the forest. Catherine, Alara, and Gareth were treated as prisoners, albeit ones afforded a certain level of courtesy due to Catherine's supposed cooperation with the Order of the Shadowed Blade. The bandit leader, a man who called himself Kale, had decided to escort them personally, his presence a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Lyra, thankfully, had been left behind, ostensibly for further questioning, but Catherine suspected Kale wanted her safely away from any potential rescue attempt. The landscape changed dramatically as they approached the capital. Towering stone walls, gray and imposing, rose from the earth, dwarfing the surrounding countryside. The city itself was a sprawling labyrinth of narrow streets, bustling markets, and grand palaces, a hive of activity and intrigue. The air was thick with the smells of smoke, spices, and humanity, a stark contrast to the clean, crisp air of Dunmere. Catherine felt a growing sense of claustrophobia, a feeling of being trapped beneath a sky of stone. The weight of the city, the weight of her mission, pressed down on her, making it difficult to breathe. They were taken to a large, imposing building, a fortress within the city walls, that served as the headquarters of the Order of the Shadowed Blade. The building was dark and foreboding, its corridors lined with armed guards, its walls adorned with strange symbols and unsettling tapestries. Catherine was separated from Alara and Gareth, who were taken to separate quarters. She was led to a lavishly decorated chamber, a stark contrast to the grim exterior of the building. The room was filled with rich furnishings, ornate tapestries, and flickering candles, creating an atmosphere of both luxury and unease. A man awaited her, seated behind a large, intricately carved desk. He was tall and slender, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He was dressed in fine robes, embroidered with the symbol of the Shadowed Blade. Lady Catherine of Dunmere, he said, his voice smooth and cultured. Welcome to our humble abode. I am Lord Valerius, the leader of the Order of the Shadowed Blade. Catherine met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the man behind it all, the mastermind behind the plot against her father, the architect of her current predicament. Lord Valerius, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. I am here under duress. I demand to know why I have been brought here. Valerius smiled, a cold, humorless smile. You are here, my lady, because you are important to us, he said. You have something we need. And you have information that we require. I have nothing that you need, Catherine said, her voice defiant. And I know nothing of your order. Valerius chuckled. Do not play coy with me, my lady, he said. We know about your father. We know about his secret activities. And we know about the ring. Catherine's hand instinctively went to her chest, where the ring was hidden beneath her gown. She felt a chill run down her spine. They knew. They knew everything. The ring is a symbol of my father's loyalty to the king, Catherine said, trying to maintain her composure. Valerius laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Loyalty? He scoffed. Your father was a traitor, my lady. He was plotting against the king. And we have proof. He gestured to a table beside him, where a rolled-up parchment lay. It was the letter, Catherine realized, the one she had found in her father's hidden chest, the one that supposedly proved his treachery. This letter, Valerius said, his voice dripping with contempt, was written by your father. It details his plans to overthrow the king, to join forces with Lord Elmsworth, a known enemy of the crown. Catherine stared at the letter, her mind reeling. She had hoped to use the letter to expose the Shadowed Blade, to reveal their plot. But they had turned the tables on her, using it as evidence against her father. This letter is a forgery, Catherine said, her voice trembling slightly. It is a fabrication, designed to frame my father. Valerius smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. Perhaps, my lady, he said. Or perhaps it is the truth. The truth that your father tried to hide. The truth that you are now trying to deny. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. But it does not matter, my lady, he said. Whether the letter is real or not, it serves our purpose. It discredits your father. It weakens your position. And it makes you vulnerable. Catherine felt a surge of anger, a burning rage against this man, against his lies, against his manipulation. But she knew that she had to control her emotions, to think strategically. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Valerius smiled. We want your cooperation, my lady, he said. We want you to join us, to become one of us, to help us achieve our goals. And if I refuse? Catherine asked, her voice challenging. Valerius shrugged. Then you will face the consequences, my lady, he said. You will be branded a traitor, just like your father. You will lose everything. Your lands, your title, your life. Catherine knew that he was not bluffing. She was trapped, cornered, with no way out. She had to find a way to stall, to buy herself time, to find a way to contact Tristan. I need time to think, she said, her voice firm. I need to consider your offer. Valerius studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowed. Very well, my lady, he said. You have until tomorrow evening. Then you will give me your answer. Join us, or face the wrath of the Shadowed Blade. He gestured to the guards, who escorted Catherine back to her chamber. As she walked down the long, dark corridor, she felt a sense of despair, a feeling of hopelessness. But she also felt a flicker of determination, a spark of defiance. She would not give up. She would not be defeated. She would find a way to fight back, to expose the Shadowed Blade, to clear her father's name. And she would find a way to reach Tristan, to tell him the truth, to ask for his help. Even if it meant risking everything. The sky outside might be stone, but her spirit, she vowed, would remain unbroken. Chapter 9. The Lioness in Winter. The chamber, opulent as it was, felt like a prison cell. Catherine paced restlessly, the rich carpets muffling her footsteps, the heavy drapes blocking out the sounds of the city. The weight of Valerius's threat, the knowledge of her father's framed betrayal, the uncertainty of Tristan's allegiance, all of it pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her. She had to find a way to contact Tristan. He was her only hope, the only person who might be able to help her.
But how?
She was under constant surveillance, her every move watched by the guards of the shadowed blade. She examined the room, searching for any possible means of escape, any secret passage, any hidden window. But there was nothing. The room was secure, designed to hold its occupants captive. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, trying to think. She remembered the stories her father had told her, the tales of brave knights and cunning heroines, of secret messages and daring escapes. She needed to find that same ingenuity, that same courage, within herself. An idea sparked in her mind. She remembered Alara, her loyal lady-in-waiting. Alara had been taken to separate quarters, but she might be able to help. She might be able to find a way to contact Tristan, to deliver a message. But how could she communicate with Alara? She couldn't leave the room, and she couldn't risk sending a written message, which could be intercepted. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the objects, searching for inspiration. Her gaze fell upon a small, intricately carved wooden box sitting on a table beside the bed. It was similar to the one Lyra had given her, the one that contained her father's ring. She picked up the box, her fingers tracing the carvings. An idea began to form in her mind, a daring, desperate plan. She remembered the songs, the ballads, that the minstrels used to sing in her father's court. They often contained hidden messages, coded verses that only those who knew the key could understand.
She would use the same technique.
She would compose a song, a ballad, that would contain a hidden message for Alara. The message would tell Alara to find Tristan, to tell him about the ring, about the Shadowed Blade's plot. She spent the next few hours working on the song, carefully crafting the verses, weaving the hidden message into the lyrics. It was a difficult task, requiring both skill and subtlety. She had to make the song sound natural, innocent, while still conveying the crucial information. She chose a familiar melody, a tune that Alara knew well, a song about a lioness protecting her cubs, a symbol of strength and resilience. She changed the words, adapting them to her situation, using metaphors and allusions to convey her message. The lioness, of course, was Catherine. The cubs were Dunmere and Thomas. The winter was the current darkness and threat. And the falcon, mentioned in a seemingly innocuous verse, was Tristan, the knight who, she hoped, would soar to her aid. The key phrase, repeated throughout the song in different forms, was faith and love, the inscription on her father's ring. When she was satisfied with the song, she waited for the right opportunity to deliver it. She knew that the guards would be making their rounds, checking on her periodically. She had to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment. As evening approached, she heard the sound of footsteps in the corridor. She quickly sat on the bed, assuming a posture of quiet contemplation. The door opened, and a guard entered, carrying a tray of food. He placed the tray on the table, his eyes scanning the room, checking for any signs of trouble. "My lady," he said, his voice gruff. "Your meal." Catherine nodded, her voice calm. "Thank you," she said. She waited for him to leave, but he lingered, his eyes fixed on her. She realized that he was waiting for her to eat, to make sure that she didn't try to hide anything in the food. She forced herself to take a few bites, her stomach churning with anxiety. She had to get rid of him, to create an opportunity to sing her song. "Tell me," she said, her voice casual, "is my lady-in-waiting, Alara, well?" The guard frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "She is fine, my lady," he said. "Why do you ask?" Catherine shrugged. "I am simply concerned for her," she said. "She is a dear friend. I miss her company." She allowed a hint of sadness, a touch of vulnerability, to enter her voice. The guard seemed to soften slightly. "She is being well cared for, my lady," he said. "Do not worry." Catherine nodded.
"Thank you," she said.
"That is comforting to know." She paused, then took a deep breath. "You know," she said, her voice soft and wistful, "sometimes, when I am feeling lonely, I sing. It helps to soothe my spirits." The guard looked at her, his expression unreadable. Catherine held her breath, waiting for his reaction. "Sing, my lady?" he said, his voice neutral. Catherine nodded. "Yes," she said. "A simple ballad. A song about a lioness protecting her cubs." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Would you allow me to sing? Just for a few moments? It would ease my heart." The guard hesitated, his eyes searching hers. He was clearly suspicious, but he also seemed to be swayed by her vulnerability, by her request. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, my lady," he said. "You may sing, but I will be listening." Catherine smiled, a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. She took a deep breath and began to sing. Her voice was clear and strong, filled with emotion. She sang the ballad she had composed, the song about the lioness, the song that contained her hidden message. The guard listened intently, his eyes fixed on her. Catherine sang with all her heart, her voice carrying through the room, reaching out to Alara, hoping that she would hear, hoping that she would understand. As she finished the song, she looked at the guard, her eyes questioning. He said nothing, simply nodded and left the room, closing the door behind him. Catherine sat there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had sung her song, delivered her message. Now, all she could do was wait and pray that Alara had heard, that she would understand, that she would find Tristan. The lioness had roared, her voice echoing through the winter night, a cry for help, a plea for justice. And she could only hope that the falcon would hear and answer her call. The cold stone of the chamber seemed to press in on her, a physical manifestation of her desperate hope. Chapter 10. Echoes of the Past. Alara, confined to a smaller, less opulent chamber than Catherine's, found herself battling a similar sense of despair. She had been questioned repeatedly by Cale, the bandit leader, about Catherine's intentions, about her knowledge of the Order of the Shadowed Blade. She had feigned ignorance, playing the part of the loyal, but somewhat dim-witted, lady-in-waiting, concerned only for her mistress's well-being. She knew that Catherine was in danger, that she was walking a tightrope, surrounded by enemies. She also knew that Catherine was relying on her, trusting her to find a way to help. She had tried to gather information, to eavesdrop on conversations, to glean any clues about the Order's plans, about Tristan's whereabouts. But the guards were watchful, the members of the Order secretive, their movements shrouded in mystery. She paced restlessly, her mind racing, trying to think of a way to escape, to contact someone, anyone, who could help them. But the fortress was secure, the guards vigilant, their loyalty to the Shadowed Blade unwavering. As evening approached, she heard the sound of singing, a faint melody drifting through the corridors. She recognized the tune, a familiar ballad that Catherine often sang, a song about a lioness protecting her cubs. She pressed her ear against the wall, listening intently. The voice was Catherine's, clear and strong, filled with emotion. But the words were different. She listened carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. She realized that Catherine was sending her a message, a coded message hidden within the lyrics of the song. She recognized the key phrase, faith and love, repeated throughout the song in different forms. She remembered the inscription on Catherine's father's ring, the symbol of his love for her mother, the symbol of his secret alliance. She understood. Catherine was telling her about the ring, about the Order of the Shadowed Blade's plot, about her father's true allegiance. And she was asking her to find Tristan, the falcon in the song, the knight who could help them. Alara's mind raced. She had to find Tristan. But how? She was a prisoner, confined to her chamber, with no way to communicate with the outside world. She remembered a conversation she had had with one of the guards, a young man named Gareth, not to be mistaken with Catherine's blacksmith, who seemed less hardened, less fanatical than the others. He had spoken of his family, of his doubts about the Order's methods, of his longing for a simpler life. She decided to take a risk, a desperate gamble. She would try to appeal to his humanity, to his sense of decency, to convince him to help her. When the guard came to bring her evening meal, Alara greeted him with a smile, a forced smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "You are kind." The guard looked at her, surprised by her words. He was used to fear, to resentment, from the prisoners, not kindness. "My name is Gareth," he said, his voice hesitant. "I am Alara," she replied. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Gareth." She paused, then took a deep breath. "Gareth," she said, her voice low and earnest, "I need your help." The guard frowned, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Help?"
he said.
"What do you mean?" Alara looked at him, her eyes pleading. "My lady, Lady Catherine," she said. "She is in danger. Great danger. And she needs a friend." The guard hesitated, his eyes searching hers. He was clearly torn, conflicted between his duty to the order and his growing unease with their methods. "I cannot," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I am sworn to the order. I cannot betray them." Alara reached out, her hand touching his arm. "Please, Gareth," she said. "I know that you are a good man. I can see it in your eyes.
You are not like them.
You do not believe in their violence, their cruelty." The guard looked away, his face etched with pain. I do not know what to do," he said. Alara pressed her advantage. "Listen to me, Gareth," she said. "Lady Catherine is innocent. Her father was innocent. They were framed by the order of the Shadowed Blade. They are trying to overthrow the king, to seize power for themselves." She told him about the ring, about the hidden message in the song, about Catherine's plea for help. She spoke with passion, with conviction, her words pouring out of her like a torrent. The guard listened intently, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was clearly struggling with his conscience, torn between his loyalty to the order and his growing belief in Alara's words. Finally, he looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I will help you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But we must be careful. If we are caught, we will be killed." Alara felt a surge of relief, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "Thank you, Gareth," she said. "Thank you. You are a brave man." They spent the next few hours planning their escape, carefully plotting their every move. Gareth knew the layout of the fortress, the routines of the guards, the secret passages that led to the outside world. He told her that Tristan was indeed in the capital, but he was being closely watched by the Shadowed Blade. He was a prisoner in all but name, his movements restricted, his communications monitored. But Gareth knew of a way to reach him, a secret meeting place, a hidden garden where Tristan often went to escape the watchful eyes of his captors. As darkness fell, Gareth led Alara through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress, avoiding the guards, slipping through the shadows. They reached a hidden door, concealed behind a tapestry, that led to a narrow, winding staircase. They descended the staircase, their hearts pounding in their chests, their every step filled with danger. They reached the bottom, and Gareth opened another door, revealing a small, enclosed garden. The garden was dark and silent, the air filled with the scent of night-blooming flowers. In the center of the garden, a figure stood silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It was Tristan. The echoes of Catherine's song, the whispered pleas of a trapped lioness, had reached their intended target, carried on the wings of a desperate hope and a young guard's flickering conscience. Chapter 11. The Unforgiving Heart. Tristan stood in the hidden garden, the cool night air a welcome balm on his troubled soul. The stone walls of the fortress, and the weight of his deception, seemed to press in on him, suffocating him. This small, secluded space, with its overgrown vines and fragrant blossoms, was his only refuge, the only place where he could breathe freely, where he could escape the constant scrutiny of the Shadowed Blade. He had been playing a dangerous game, pretending to be a loyal member of the Order, while secretly working to undermine their plans, to protect the king, to atone for the sin he felt he'd committed by not preventing Lord Edmund's death. He had been feeding information to the king's loyalists, using his access to the court, his knowledge of the Order's inner workings, to thwart their schemes. But it was a lonely, perilous path. He was surrounded by enemies, his every move watched, his every word scrutinized. He lived in constant fear of discovery, of betrayal, of the inevitable moment when his deception would be revealed. And Catherine believed him to be a traitor, the murderer of her father. The thought of her hatred, her disgust, was a constant ache in his heart, a wound that refused to heal. He had tried to explain, to tell her the truth, that day in Dunmere, but she had refused to listen, her eyes filled with a pain and fury that had cut him to the core. He longed to see her, to tell her everything, to beg for her forgiveness. But he knew that it was impossible. He was a prisoner, his movements restricted, his communications monitored. He closed his eyes, breathing in the sweet scent of the night-blooming jasmine. He imagined Catherine, her face, her smile, her voice. He remembered their stolen moments in the orchard at Dunmere, the whispered promises, the shared dreams. He had loved her with all his heart, with all his soul. And he had lost her, through his own actions, through his own perceived betrayal. Suddenly, he heard a sound, a faint rustling in the bushes. He tensed, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his sword. He had been careful, making sure that he was not followed, that he was alone. He peered into the shadows, his eyes scanning the darkness. He saw a figure emerge from the bushes, a woman, her face partially hidden by a hood. "Who is there?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The woman stepped forward, her hood falling back to reveal a face that was both familiar and unexpected. It was Alara, Catherine's lady-in-waiting. "Alara?" he said, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here?" Alara rushed towards him, her eyes filled with urgency. "Sir Tristan," she said, her voice breathless. "Thank the heavens I found you. We need your help."
"We?"
he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Lady Catherine," Alara said. "She is here in the capital. She is a prisoner of the Order of the Shadowed Blade." Tristan's heart skipped a beat. "Catherine? Here? A prisoner?"
"What?"
he exclaimed.
"How? Why?"
Alara quickly recounted everything that had happened, from Catherine's arrival at the bandit camp, to her discovery of her father's ring, to her desperate attempt to contact Tristan through a coded song. Tristan listened intently, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe it. Catherine was here, in danger, and she was asking for his help. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief, fear, hope, and a renewed sense of guilt. He had to help her. He had to save her. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice urgent. Alara told him about the fortress, about Lord Valerius, about the Order's plans to overthrow the king. She told him about the ring, the proof of Lord Edmund's innocence, the evidence that could expose the Shadowed Blade's treachery. "We need to get her out of there," Tristan said, his voice determined. "We need to get her to the king, to reveal the truth."
"But how?"
Alara asked, her voice filled with despair. "The fortress is impenetrable. The guards are everywhere." Tristan thought for a moment, his mind racing. He knew the fortress well. He had spent many hours there, pretending to be a loyal member of the Order. He knew its secrets, its weaknesses. "There is a way," he said, his voice firm. "A secret passage, known only to a few. It leads from the garden to the royal stables. We can use it to escape." "But the guards," Alara said. "They will see us." Tristan shook his head. "Not if we are careful," he said. "Not if we time it right. There is a changing of the guard at midnight. We can use that to our advantage." They spent the next few hours planning their escape, carefully plotting their every move. Tristan knew that it was a dangerous plan, a desperate gamble. But it was their only chance. As midnight approached, Tristan and Alara made their way back to the fortress, slipping through the shadows, avoiding the guards. They reached the hidden door that led to the secret passage, the same door that Gareth had shown Alara earlier. Tristan opened the door, and they entered the passage, their hearts pounding in their chests. The passage was dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of dust and damp earth. They walked slowly, carefully, their every step filled with tension. They reached the end of the passage, and Tristan opened another door, revealing a small, enclosed courtyard. The courtyard was empty, the guards having just completed their changing of the shift. Tristan and Alara quickly crossed the courtyard, reaching another door that led to Catherine's chamber. Tristan hesitated, his hand on the door handle. He was about to face Catherine, the woman he loved, the woman who believed him to be a traitor. He didn't know how she would react, how she would greet him. He took a deep breath and opened the door. Catherine was standing by the window, looking out at the night sky. She turned as she heard the door open, her eyes widening in surprise as she saw him. "Tristan?" she said, her voice a mixture of shock and disbelief, and, to his immense pain, an unforgiving coldness that pierced him like a blade. Chapter 12. A Knight's Torn Soul. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with unspoken accusations, with years of assumed betrayal, with the weight of a love that had seemingly died. Catherine stared at Tristan, her heart a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Relief warred with anger, hope battled with suspicion. His presence was a shock, a violation of the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart. "What are you doing here?" she asked again, her voice sharper this time, her tone laced with a coldness that belied the turmoil within. Tristan stepped into the room, Alara close behind him. He closed the door softly, his eyes never leaving Catherine's. He looked different, wearier, his face etched with lines of stress and hardship that hadn't been there before. The easy charm, the confident smile, were gone, replaced by a haunted intensity. "I came to help you," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Alara told me everything." Catherine scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Help me?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The man who stood by and watched my father die? The man who betrayed his oaths, his loyalty, his everything?" The words were like daggers, aimed straight at his heart. He flinched, but he didn't look away. He knew he deserved her anger, her contempt. He had earned it. "I know what you believe," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "And I understand why. But it is not true, Catherine. I did not betray your father. I did not betray you." "Then explain," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and a desperate, buried hope. "Explain how you stood there, beside Lord Ashworth, as he murdered my father. Explain why you did nothing to stop him." Tristan took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts, to explain the impossible, to convey the truth that had been hidden for so long. "I was under orders," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his confession. "Orders from your father." Catherine stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My father?" she said. "What are you talking about?" Tristan told her everything. He told her about the Order of the Falcon and the Dove, the secret society that her father had led, dedicated to protecting the kingdom from its enemies, from the corrupting influence of the Shadowed Blade. He told her about the plot against the king, about Lord Ashworth's involvement, about the Shadowed Blade's plan to seize power. He told her about her father's discovery of the plot, about his decision to infiltrate the Order, to gather evidence, to expose their treachery. He told her about the night of her father's death, about the impossible choice he had been forced to make. Lord Ashworth had discovered Tristan's true allegiance. He had threatened to expose him, to kill Catherine and Thomas, unless Tristan played along, unless he pretended to be a loyal member of the Shadowed Blade. "Your father knew the risk," Tristan said, his voice filled with pain. "He knew that he might have to sacrifice himself to save the kingdom, to save you. He ordered me to protect you, to obey Ashworth, to do whatever was necessary to survive, to expose the Shadowed Blade from within." Catherine listened in stunned silence, her mind reeling. It was too much to take in, too much to believe. Could it be true? Could her father have been a hero, a secret protector of the realm, rather than the traitor she had believed him to be? "The ring," Alara interjected, stepping forward. "Show her the ring, my lady." Catherine, still reeling from Tristan's revelations, looked at Alara, then reached beneath her gown and pulled out the silver ring, her father's ring, the one Lyra had given her. Tristan's eyes widened in recognition. "The ring," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It is the symbol of the Order of the Falcon and the Dove. Your father always wore it. It was a sign of his loyalty, his commitment to the cause." Catherine looked at the ring, the intertwined falcon and dove, the inscription Fides et Amor, faith and love. She remembered her father's words, the stories he had told her, the values he had instilled in her. She began to understand. She began to believe. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice softer now, the anger beginning to subside, replaced by a tentative hope. Tristan looked down, his face etched with regret.
"I couldn't," he said.
"I was sworn to secrecy. And I feared for your safety. If the Shadowed Blade had known that you knew the truth, they would have killed you." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pleading, desperate hope. "I know I have betrayed your trust, Catherine," he said. "I know I have caused you unimaginable pain. But I swear to you on my honor, on my life, I have always been loyal to your father, to you, to the kingdom." Catherine searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deception, any hint of falsehood. But she saw only truth, only pain, only a love that had endured despite the betrayal, the separation, the impossible choices. She felt a shift in her heart, a melting of the ice that had encased it for so long. The anger, the resentment, began to fade, replaced by a tentative understanding, a flicker of forgiveness. She was on the verge, she felt it, of believing him completely. "We need to get to the king," Tristan said, his voice urgent. "We need to show him the ring, to reveal the Shadowed Blade's plot. We need to clear your father's name." Before she could answer him, before she could fully put to words what this meant, a distant shout, an alarm, echoed from the depths of the fortress. They had been discovered. Chapter 13. The Chains of Duty. The alarm shattered the fragile peace that had begun to settle between Catherine and Tristan. The distant shouts, the clanging of metal, the sudden surge of activity within the fortress, all of it signaled that their escape had been discovered. "We have to go," Tristan said, his voice urgent, his hand reaching for Catherine's.
"Now."
But Catherine hesitated. The shift in her heart, the tentative forgiveness, was still fragile, incomplete. The years of believing him a traitor, the pain of his perceived betrayal, couldn't be erased in an instant. "How can I trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, her eyes searching his. "How can I be sure that this isn't another trick, another deception?" Tristan's face fell, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. He knew that he had a long way to go to earn back her trust, to prove his loyalty. "I understand your doubts, Catherine," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But I swear to you, I am telling the truth. I will protect you. I will get you to the king. I will clear your father's name." He held out his hand, his eyes pleading. "Please, Catherine," he said. "Trust me. Just this once." Alara stepped forward, her hand resting on Catherine's arm. "My lady," she said, her voice soft but firm.
"We have no time.
We must go. Trust your heart. Trust what you know to be true." Catherine looked at Alara, then at Tristan. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation in his plea. She remembered the love they had shared, the dreams they had woven together. She remembered her father's words, his belief in Tristan, his trust in his loyalty. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She would trust him. She would take a leap of faith, a desperate gamble on the man she had once loved, the man who might still hold the key to her future, to her father's legacy. She placed her hand in his, her fingers intertwining with his. The touch, once so familiar, now felt tentative, fragile, but also filled with a spark of renewed hope. "Let's go," she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his. Tristan led them quickly through the secret passage, Alara close behind. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer, the shouts of the guards echoing through the narrow corridors. They reached the end of the passage, the door that led to the royal stables. Tristan paused, listening intently. He could hear the guards approaching, their footsteps pounding on the stone floor. "We have to hurry," he said, his voice urgent. "They are almost upon us." He opened the door, and they slipped out into the stables. The air was filled with the smell of horses and hay, the sounds of restless animals shifting in their stalls. Tristan led them quickly through the stables, searching for a way out, a path that would lead them to safety. He knew that the stables were heavily guarded, that they would have to be careful to avoid detection. Suddenly, a group of guards appeared at the far end of the stables, their swords drawn, their faces grim. They had found them. There they are.
One of the guards shouted.
Stop them. Tristan drew his sword, his heart pounding in his chest. He was ready to fight, to defend Catherine and Alara, to give his life for them if necessary. Stay behind me, he said, his voice firm, his eyes fixed on the approaching guards. Catherine and Alara huddled together, their faces pale with fear. They knew that they were in a dangerous situation, that their lives were on the line. The guards charged towards them, their swords clashing against Tristan's. The battle was fierce, desperate, the sounds of steel on steel echoing through the stables. Tristan fought with the skill and courage of a seasoned knight, his every move precise, his every strike deadly. He was driven by a fierce determination to protect Catherine, to redeem himself, to prove his loyalty. But the guards were numerous, and they were relentless. Tristan found himself surrounded, pressed back, his strength waning. Suddenly, one of the guards broke through his defenses, his sword slashing across Tristan's arm. A searing pain shot through him, and his sword slipped from his grasp. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his eyes meeting Catherine's. He saw the fear in her eyes, the desperation, the renewed doubt.
No,
Catherine cried, her voice filled with anguish. She rushed forward, stepping in front of Tristan, shielding him from the guards. She held up her father's ring, the symbol of the Order of the Falcon and the Dove. Stop, she shouted, her voice ringing through the stables. I am Lady Catherine of Dunmere, daughter of Lord Edmund. I command you to stop. The guards hesitated, their eyes fixed on the ring. They recognized the symbol, the sign of a powerful, secret order. They didn't know what to do. This man, Catherine continued, her voice firm and clear, pointing to Tristan, is under my protection. He is a loyal servant of the king. He is here to expose a plot against the crown. The guards looked at each other, their faces confused, uncertain. They had been ordered to capture Catherine and Tristan, but they also knew that the Order of the Falcon and the Dove was a force to be reckoned with. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the shadows.
Stand down.
A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, imposing man dressed in the royal livery. It was Sir Gareth, the blacksmith from Dunmere, Catherine's loyal protector.
Sir Gareth,
Catherine exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. Gareth approached the guards, his eyes stern. These people are under the king's protection, he said. They are here to reveal a conspiracy against the crown. Stand down and let them pass. The guards, relieved to be relieved of their dilemma, lowered their swords and stepped aside. Tristan, his arm bleeding, his body aching, looked at Catherine, his eyes filled with gratitude and a renewed hope. She had saved him. She had believed in him. Catherine helped him to his feet, her touch gentle, her eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? She asked, her voice soft. Tristan nodded, his face pale but determined. I am fine, he said. We need to go. We need to get to the king. With Gareth leading the way, they left the stables, slipping through the shadows, making their way towards the royal palace. The chains of duty, the bonds of loyalty, had been tested, strained, but not broken. And the hope for justice, for a love reborn, flickered brighter than ever before. Chapter 14. Beyond the castle walls. The streets of the capital were dark and deserted, the only sounds the occasional scuttling of rats and the distant cries of night watchmen. Catherine, Tristan, Alara, and Gareth moved quickly through the shadows, keeping to the narrow alleys and back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Tristan, despite his wounded arm, set a brisk pace, his senses alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He knew that the shadowed blade would be searching for them, that they were in constant danger of being discovered. Catherine, her hand resting on Tristan's good arm, matched his stride, her fear tempered by a growing sense of determination. She had made her choice. She had trusted Tristan, and she would see this through, no matter the cost. Alara and Gareth followed close behind, their faces grim, their hands never far from their weapons. They were loyal to Catherine, to Dunmere, and they would protect her with their lives. As they approached the royal palace, Tristan slowed his pace, his eyes scanning the imposing walls, the heavily guarded gates. He knew that getting inside would be difficult, dangerous. The palace was a fortress, its defenses formidable. "We need to find a way in," he said, his voice low. "A way that won't attract attention." Gareth, his knowledge of the city proving invaluable, spoke up. "There is a small postern gate," he said, "on the north side of the palace. It is rarely used, and the guards there are often lax." Tristan nodded. "It's our best chance," he said. "Let's go." They made their way to the north side of the palace, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the patrols. They reached the postern gate, a small, unassuming door set into the massive stone wall. Tristan examined the gate, his eyes searching for any signs of guards, any traps, any indication that they had been discovered. "It looks clear," he said, his voice low. "But be ready for anything." He carefully opened the gate, and they slipped inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. They found themselves in a narrow, dimly lit passage, the air thick with the smell of damp stone. Tristan led them quickly through the passage, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor. They reached another door, which led to the palace gardens. Tristan opened the door, and they stepped out into the gardens. The air was cool and fresh, the scent of roses and jasmine filling the night. The moon, a silver crescent in the inky sky, cast a pale light over the manicured lawns and sculpted hedges. The gardens were deserted, the only sounds the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of the city. Tristan led them quickly across the gardens, towards the main palace building. He knew that they had to reach the king, to warn him about the Shadowed Blade's plot, to show him the ring, the proof of Lord Edmund's innocence. But he also knew that the palace was filled with spies and informants, that they could be discovered at any moment. As they approached the palace, Tristan saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching them. He tensed, his hand going to his sword. "Who is there?" he demanded, his voice sharp. The figure stepped forward, revealing himself to be a man dressed in the royal livery. It was Sir Calin, one of the king's most trusted knights, a man known for his loyalty and his courage. "Sir Tristan?" Calin said, his voice filled with surprise. "What are you doing here? And with Lady Catherine?" Tristan breathed a sigh of relief. He knew Calin, and he trusted him. "We need to speak with the king," Tristan said, his voice urgent. "It is a matter of utmost importance. There is a plot against the crown." Calin's eyes narrowed. "A plot?" he said. "What are you talking about?" Tristan quickly explained everything, telling Calin about the Order of the Shadowed Blade, about Lord Valerius, about their plan to overthrow the king. He showed him the ring, the proof of Lord Edmund's innocence, the evidence that could expose the Shadowed Blade's treachery. Calin listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each passing moment. He knew that Tristan was telling the truth, that the kingdom was in grave danger. "Come with me," Calin said, his voice firm. "I will take you to the king. But we must be careful. The palace is filled with spies." He led them through the palace, avoiding the main corridors, keeping to the back passages and servants' quarters. They reached the king's private chambers, a heavily guarded area where only the most trusted advisors were allowed. Calin spoke to the guards, explaining the urgency of their situation, vouching for their loyalty. The guards, recognizing Calin and trusting his judgment, allowed them to pass. They entered the king's chambers, a large, opulent room filled with rich furnishings, ornate tapestries, and flickering candlelight. The king, a tall, imposing man with a stern face and piercing eyes, was seated at a large table, studying a map. He looked up as they entered, his eyes narrowing in surprise. "Sir Calin?" he said. "What is the meaning of this? And who are these people?" Calin stepped forward, bowing low. "Your Majesty," he said, "these are Sir Tristan de Clare, Lady Catherine of Dunmere, and their companions. They have come to warn you of a plot against the crown." The king's eyes fixed on Catherine, then on Tristan. He recognized them, and his face hardened. "Sir Tristan," he said, his voice cold. "I had heard that you were a traitor, a member of the Order of the Shadowed Blade." "That is not true, Your Majesty," Tristan said, his voice firm. "I have been working against the Shadowed Blade from within. I have been gathering evidence of their treachery. Catherine stepped forward, holding out her father's ring. Your Majesty, she said, this is my father's ring, the symbol of the Order of the Falcon and the Dove. He was not a traitor. He was a loyal servant of the crown, and he was murdered by the shadowed blade for his loyalty. The king took the ring, examining it closely. He recognized the symbol, the sign of a secret order that he had thought long disbanded. Tristan and Catherine then recounted everything, from Lord Edmund's death to their escape from the Shadowed Blade's fortress. They presented the evidence, the letter, the ring, the testimony of their companions. The king listened intently, his face growing graver with each passing moment. He realized that he had been deceived, that his own court was riddled with spies and traitors, that his life was in danger. He looked at Tristan, his eyes filled with a newfound respect. Sir Tristan, he said, I have misjudged you. You have proven your loyalty, your courage. You have saved the kingdom. He turned to Catherine, his eyes softening. Lady Catherine, he said, your father was a hero. His name will be cleared. His legacy will be honored. Beyond the castle walls, the dawn was breaking, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. A new day was dawning, a day of reckoning, a day of justice. And the love that had been tested, strained, almost broken, was now stronger than ever, forged in the fires of betrayal and redemption. Chapter 15. A Tapestry of Lies. The king, once convinced of the truth, acted swiftly and decisively. He ordered the immediate arrest of Lord Valerius and his known associates within the court. The palace guard, bolstered by Sir Callan and Gareth's unwavering loyalty, moved with precision, rounding up the conspirators before they could mount any resistance. The news of the Shadowed Blade's attempted coup and Lord Edmund's exoneration spread like wildfire through the capital. The city, which had been holding its breath under a cloud of suspicion and fear, erupted in a mixture of relief and outrage. Catherine and Tristan, hailed as heroes, were given chambers within the palace, their safety and comfort now a priority for the king. Tristan's wound was tended to by the royal physicians, and while the physical pain was significant, it was nothing compared to the emotional wounds that were slowly beginning to heal. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Catherine, with Tristan at her side, provided detailed accounts of the Shadowed Blade's operations, their network of spies, their methods of infiltration. She revealed the names of those involved, the locations of their secret meeting places, the details of their plans. The king, deeply shaken by the extent of the conspiracy, ordered a thorough investigation, determined to root out every last vestige of the Shadowed Blade's influence. He appointed Tristan as his chief advisor in the matter, trusting his knowledge and his loyalty implicitly. For Catherine, the process was both cathartic and painful. Reliving the events of the past few weeks, recounting the details of her father's death, exposing the lies that had been woven around him, was emotionally draining. But it was also necessary, a crucial step in clearing his name, in restoring his honor, in bringing justice to those who had wronged him. One evening, as Catherine and Tristan sat together in her chambers, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls, Catherine spoke of the tapestry of lies that had been woven around her father, the intricate web of deceit that had almost destroyed her family, her legacy. It's as if they took threads of truth, she said, her voice soft and melancholic, and twisted them, distorted them, weaving them into a fabric of falsehood. It was so convincing, so believable, that even I began to doubt him. Tristan reached out, his hand covering hers. I know, he said, his voice filled with understanding. They are masters of manipulation, of deception. They prey on people's fears, their doubts, their vulnerabilities.
But why?
Catherine asked, her eyes searching his. Why did they target my father? What did they hope to gain? Tristan explained that Lord Edmund had been a powerful and influential figure, a respected leader among the northern lords. He had been a vocal critic of the king's policies, but his loyalty to the crown had never been in question. The Shadowed Blade saw him as a threat, Tristan said. They knew that he would never support their plans, that he would oppose their attempts to seize power. They had to eliminate him, to silence him, to discredit him. And they used you, Catherine said, her voice filled with a lingering bitterness. They used your loyalty to him, your love for me, against you. Tristan nodded, his face etched with pain. They did, he said. They knew that I would do anything to protect you, to protect your father. They exploited that, turning my own strengths into weaknesses. But you fought back, Catherine said, her voice filled with a newfound admiration. You risked everything, your life, your reputation, to expose them, to save the kingdom. Tristan looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had endured despite the trials, the betrayals, the impossible choices. I did it for you, Catherine, he said, his voice soft and tender. For your father. For the future we had dreamed of. Catherine felt a warmth spread through her heart, a melting of the ice that had encased it for so long. The anger, the resentment, had faded, replaced by a deep and abiding love, a love that had been tested and proven true. She leaned towards him, her hand reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines of stress and hardship that had etched themselves there. I was wrong about you, Tristan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I misjudged you. I let my grief, my anger, blind me to the truth. Tristan captured her hand, bringing it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her palm. You had every right to doubt me, Catherine, he said. I gave you every reason to. But I hope that I have proven myself to you. I hope that you can forgive me. Catherine smiled, a genuine smile, the first one that had reached her eyes in weeks. There is nothing to forgive, Tristan, she said. You are faced with an impossible choice, a choice between loyalty and survival, between love and duty. You did what you had to do. She paused, then added, her voice filled with a deep and abiding love, and I am grateful. For your courage, for your loyalty, for your love. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. The tapestry of lies had been torn apart, the threads of truth revealed. And in its place, a new tapestry was being woven, a tapestry of love, of forgiveness, of a future reborn. Chapter 16. The Weight of a Crown. The days following the exposure of the shadowed blade were filled with a sense of both relief and renewed purpose. The king, deeply grateful for Catherine and Tristan's bravery, showered them with honors and accolades. He publicly exonerated Lord Edmund, declaring him a hero of the realm, and ordered a grand memorial to be erected in his honor. Catherine, restored to her rightful position as Lady of Dunmere, found herself increasingly drawn into the affairs of the court. The king, recognizing her intelligence, her integrity, and her unwavering loyalty, sought her counsel on matters of state, valuing her insights and her perspective. Tristan, appointed as the king's chief advisor, worked tirelessly to dismantle the remnants of the Shadowed Blades network, to identify and apprehend those who had escaped justice. He also began to implement reforms within the court, seeking to root out corruption and to ensure that such a conspiracy could never happen again. The weight of responsibility, the burden of leadership, was heavy on both of them. They had seen firsthand the fragility of power, the ease with which it could be corrupted, the devastating consequences of betrayal and deceit. They were determined to use their newfound influence to create a better, more just, more secure kingdom. One day, as Catherine and Tristan walked together in the palace gardens, the same gardens where they had risked their lives to reach the king, Catherine spoke of the challenges they faced, the weight of the crown, the responsibility they now bore. It's overwhelming, Tristan, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The power, the influence, the decisions that must be made, it's a heavy burden. Tristan nodded, his face etched with a similar concern. It is, he said. But we are not alone. We have each other. And we have the support of the king, of loyal advisors, of the people. But what if we make mistakes? Catherine asked, her eyes searching his. What if we fail? What if we are not strong enough, wise enough, to handle this? Tristan stopped walking, turning to face her, his hands gently cupping her face. We will make mistakes, Catherine, he said, his voice soft but firm. We are human. We are not perfect, but we will learn from our mistakes. We will strive to do what is right, what is just, what is best for the kingdom." He looked into her eyes, his gaze filled with a deep and abiding love, a love that had been tested and proven true. "And we will have each other," he said. "We will support each other, encourage each other, hold each other accountable. We will face whatever challenges come our way, together." Catherine felt a warmth spread through her heart, a sense of peace and confidence that she had not felt in a long time. She knew that Tristan was right. They were not alone. They had each other. And together, they could overcome anything. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, her arms wrapping around his waist. "I love you, Tristan," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I love you more than words can say." Tristan held her close, his arms tightening around her, his heart overflowing with love. "And I love you, Catherine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "With all my heart, with all my soul." They stood there for a long moment, embracing, their hearts beating as one, their love a beacon of hope in a world that had been filled with darkness and deceit. As they continued their walk, Catherine spoke of her plans for Dunmere, of her desire to rebuild, to restore, to create a brighter future for her people. "I want to make Dunmere a place of peace and prosperity," she said, her voice filled with determination. "A place where justice prevails, where the people are safe and secure, where everyone has the opportunity to thrive." Tristan smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. "You will, Catherine," he said. "You have the strength, the courage, the compassion to make Dunmere a shining example for the rest of the kingdom. And you will be there beside me?" Catherine asked, her eyes searching his. Tristan nodded. "Always," he said. "I will always be by your side. We will rule together, Catherine. We will build a better future together." The weight of the crown, the burden of responsibility, still rested heavily upon them. But they were no longer afraid. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged victorious. And they knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they had their love, their loyalty, their shared commitment to justice, they could overcome any obstacle, conquer any challenge. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the palace gardens, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful sight, a symbol of hope, of renewal, of a future filled with promise. And Catherine and Tristan, hand in hand, walked towards that future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Kiss. Despite the king's decisive actions and the apparent dismantling of the shadowed blade, a lingering unease persisted within the court. Whispers of hidden loyalists, of secret meetings, of plots still simmering beneath the surface, circulated like a persistent cough in the grand halls. Catherine, despite her growing confidence and her deepening relationship with Tristan, couldn't shake the feeling that the serpent, though wounded, was not yet dead. One evening, a grand feast was held in the royal palace to celebrate the king's renewed health and to honor those who had helped expose the conspiracy. The great hall was filled with nobles, knights, and dignitaries, all dressed in their finest attire. Music filled the air, laughter echoed off the walls, and the tables groaned under the weight of the lavish food and drink. Catherine, dressed in a gown of deep emerald velvet, her father's ring proudly displayed on her finger, sat beside Tristan at the high table, her heart filled with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had come so far, overcome so much, but she knew that the battle was not yet over. As the evening progressed, Catherine noticed a familiar face across the hall. It was Lord Elmsworth, the nobleman to whom her father's forged letter had been addressed. He was a powerful and influential figure, known for his opposition to the king, and his presence at the feast, despite his past associations, was unsettling. Catherine watched him carefully, her eyes scanning his face, his movements, searching for any sign of treachery, any hint of his continued involvement with the shadowed blade. She saw him speaking with a group of nobles, his voice low and conspiratorial, his eyes darting nervously around the hall. She felt a chill run down her spine.
He was up to something.
She leaned towards Tristan, her voice barely a whisper. "Tristan," she said, "look at Lord Elmsworth.
He's plotting something.
I can feel it. Tristan followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing as he observed Elmsworth. He, too, felt a sense of unease, a suspicion that the nobleman was not to be trusted. I'll keep an eye on him, Tristan said, his voice low and reassuring. Don't worry, Catherine. I won't let him harm you, or the king. But Catherine couldn't shake her feeling of dread, her intuition that something was terribly wrong. She remembered Lyra, the mysterious woman who had warned her, who had given her the wooden box containing her father's ring. She hadn't seen Lyra since that day at Dunmere, and she wondered where she was, what she was doing. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. A woman screamed, a glass shattered, and a hush fell over the crowd. Catherine and Tristan rose to their feet, their eyes scanning the scene. They saw Lord Elmsworth standing over a fallen figure, his face pale and shocked, his hands trembling. The fallen figure was Lyra. She lay motionless on the floor, a small, ornate dagger protruding from her chest. Catherine gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. Lyra! She had been murdered. The crowd surged forward, a wave of confusion and fear washing over the hall. The king, his face grim, ordered the guards to clear the room, to secure the area, to find the murderer. Catherine rushed towards Lyra, her heart filled with a mixture of grief and anger. She knelt beside her, her hand reaching out to touch her, but Tristan stopped her. Don't, Catherine, he said, his voice urgent. It's too late.
She's gone.
Catherine looked at Lyra's lifeless body, her eyes filled with tears. She had been so brave, so helpful, so mysterious. And now, she was dead, another victim of the Shadowed Blade's treachery. Tristan examined the dagger, his face grim. It was a familiar design, a weapon favored by the Shadowed Blade. He recognized the intricate carvings, the symbol of the serpent, the mark of their deadly order. They're still here, Tristan said, his voice low and dangerous. The Shadowed Blade is still operating, even within the palace walls. Lord Elmsworth, his face ashen, his voice trembling, swore his innocence. He claimed that he had been talking to Lyra, that she had suddenly collapsed, that he had no idea how she had been stabbed. But Catherine didn't believe him. She had seen the look in his eyes, the fear, the guilt. He was involved, somehow. The king, enraged by the murder, ordered Elmsworth's arrest, despite his protestations. He vowed to find the killer, to bring them to justice, to eradicate the Shadowed Blade once and for all. As Catherine stood there, looking at Lyra's lifeless body, she felt a renewed sense of determination, a burning desire for vengeance. The serpent had struck again, its kiss deadly and cruel. But she would not be deterred. She would not be defeated. She would fight back, with all her strength, with all her courage, until the Shadowed Blade was destroyed, until justice was served. The personal cost, she realized with a chilling clarity, was far from fully paid. Chapter 18. Where Honor Lies Bleeding. The murder of Lyra cast a dark shadow over the court, shattering the fragile sense of security that had begun to return. Fear and suspicion reigned once more, as everyone wondered who among them could be a secret member of the Shadowed Blade, who could be trusted, who was a potential enemy. The king, enraged and determined to root out the remaining conspirators, ordered a thorough investigation, placing Tristan in charge. He gave him full authority to question anyone, to search anywhere, to do whatever was necessary to uncover the truth and bring the killers to justice. Tristan, his heart heavy with grief for Lyra and a renewed sense of urgency, threw himself into the investigation. He interrogated the guards, the servants, the nobles who had been present at the feast. He searched their chambers, examined their belongings, scrutinized their every word and action. Catherine, despite her own grief and fear, assisted Tristan in his efforts. She had a keen eye for detail, a sharp intuition, and a deep understanding of courtly intrigue. She helped him to piece together the fragments of evidence, to identify the inconsistencies, to uncover the hidden connections. They discovered that Lyra had been working as a spy for the king, infiltrating the Shadowed Blade and gathering information about their plans. She had been close to uncovering a major plot, a plan to assassinate the king and seize control of the kingdom. The evidence pointed towards Lord Elmsworth, but it was circumstantial, not conclusive. He denied any involvement in Lyra's murder, claiming that he had been framed, that he was a victim of the Shadowed Blade's machinations. Tristan, despite his suspicions, couldn't find any concrete proof linking Elmsworth to the crime. The nobleman was cunning, manipulative, and he had powerful allies within the court who vouched for his innocence. One evening, as Tristan and Catherine sat together in his chambers, poring over the evidence, Tristan expressed his frustration, his doubt, his fear that the killer might escape justice. "I don't know, Catherine," he said, his voice weary. "I can't seem to find the missing piece, the evidence that will definitively prove Elmsworth's guilt. He's too clever, too careful." Catherine looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. She saw the exhaustion on his face, the lines of stress and worry, the burden of responsibility that weighed heavily upon him. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Tristan," she said, her voice soft and gentle.
You need to rest.
"You need to take care of yourself." Tristan shook his head. "I can't rest, Catherine," he said. "Not until I find Lyra's killer. Not until I bring justice to those who are responsible." He paused, then added, his voice filled with a deep and abiding pain. "I failed her, Catherine. I failed to protect her, just as I failed to protect your father." Catherine reached out, her hand covering his. "You did not fail them, Tristan," she said. "You did everything you could. You risked your life, your reputation, to protect them, to expose the Shadowed Blade. But it wasn't enough," Tristan said, his voice filled with self-reproach. "They're both dead, and the killers are still out there." Catherine tightened her grip on his hand, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We will find them, Tristan," she said. "We will not rest until we do. We will bring them to justice, for Lyra, for my father, for the kingdom." Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A guard entered, his face pale and anxious. "Sir Tristan," he said, his voice urgent. "Lord Elmsworth, he's escaped." Tristan and Catherine exchanged a look of alarm. Elmsworth's escape was a major setback, a sign that the Shadowed Blade was still active, still powerful, still capable of striking at the heart of the court.
How?
Tristan demanded, his voice sharp. The guard explained that Elmsworth had been held under guard in his chambers, but he had somehow managed to overpower his guards, to slip out of the palace undetected. "He must have had help," Tristan said, his mind racing. "Someone within the palace must have aided him." He turned to Catherine, his eyes filled with a grim determination. "We need to find him, Catherine," he said, "before he can do any more harm, before he can escape the kingdom." They left the palace immediately, accompanied by Gareth and a small group of loyal guards. They searched the city, questioning informants, following leads, pursuing every possible avenue of escape. As the night wore on, they received a tip that Elmsworth had been seen heading towards the docks, towards the river that flowed through the capital. They raced to the docks, their hearts pounding in their chests. They saw a small boat pulling away from the shore, a figure silhouetted against the moonlit water. It was Elmsworth. Tristan and his men commandeered another boat, and they set off in pursuit, the chase on. The river was dark and treacherous, the current strong, the night filled with danger. As they closed in on Elmsworth's boat, Tristan saw that he was not alone. Another figure stood beside him, a figure that was both familiar and shocking. It was Sir Calin, the king's trusted knight, the man who had helped them to reach the king, the man who had seemed so loyal, so courageous. Tristan's heart sank. Calin? A member of the Shadowed Blade? It seemed impossible, unbelievable. But there he was, standing beside Elmsworth, aiding his escape. The place where honor was supposed to lie was bleeding with betrayal. And the wound, this time, was deeper and more painful than any Tristan had yet endured. Chapter 19. A Dawn of Reckoning. The revelation of Sir Calin's treachery struck Tristan like a physical blow. He had trusted Calin, admired him, considered him a friend and a staunch ally. The betrayal cut deep, shaking his faith in his own judgment, in the very foundations of loyalty and honor.
Kaelin!
Tristan shouted across the water, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury. What are you doing? Stop the boat. Kaelin, his face illuminated by the moonlight, offered a cold, cruel smile. It's too late, Tristan, he called back. You can't stop us. The shadowed blade will rise again. Elmsworth, his face pale but determined, steered the boat towards the open sea, seeking to escape the confines of the capital, the reach of the king's justice. Tristan ordered his men to row faster, to close the gap, to prevent Elmsworth's escape. The two boats raced through the dark water, the chase desperate and dangerous. Catherine, standing beside Tristan, her hand resting on his arm, felt his anger, his pain, his determination. She knew that he was struggling with Kaelin's betrayal, that it had shaken him to his core. We'll stop them, Tristan, she said, her voice firm and reassuring. We won't let them get away. As they drew closer to Elmsworth's boat, Tristan prepared to board, to confront Kaelin, to bring him and Elmsworth to justice. But Kaelin was ready for him. He drew a crossbow, aiming it directly at Tristan. Stay back, Tristan, he warned, his voice cold and menacing. Or I'll shoot. Tristan hesitated, his eyes locked on Kaelin's. He knew that Kaelin was capable of killing him, that he wouldn't hesitate to carry out his threat. Kaelin, don't do this, Tristan pleaded, his voice filled with a desperate hope that he could still reach the man he had once considered a friend. It's not too late to turn back. Surrender and face the king's justice.
Kaelin laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Justice? He scoffed.
There is no justice, Tristan. Only power. And the shadowed blade will have that power. He fired the crossbow. The bolt whizzed through the air, narrowly missing Tristan, striking the wooden railing beside him. Tristan knew that he had no choice. He had to fight. He had to stop Kaelin and Elmsworth, even if it meant killing a man he had once considered a friend. He ordered his men to board Elmsworth's boat. The two boats collided, the impact jarring, the fighting fierce and brutal. Tristan leaped onto Elmsworth's boat, his sword drawn, his heart pounding in his chest. He faced Kaelin, their swords clashing in the moonlight, the sparks flying, the sounds of steel on steel echoing across the water. The fight was intense, personal, a battle between two skilled knights, two former friends, now bitter enemies. Tristan fought with a fury born of betrayal, of grief, of a desperate need for justice. Kaelin fought with a cold, ruthless determination, his loyalty to the shadowed blade unwavering. As they fought, Catherine and Gareth boarded the boat, joining the fray, protecting Tristan, battling Elmsworth's men. Elmsworth, seeing that the tide was turning against him, tried to escape, to jump into the water and swim to shore. But Catherine intercepted him, her dagger drawn, her face set with a fierce determination. You won't escape, Elmsworth, she said, her voice cold and hard. You will face justice for your crimes. Elmsworth, cornered and desperate, lunged at her, attempting to knock her overboard. But Catherine was quicker, more agile. She sidestepped his attack, and with a swift movement, plunged her dagger into his arm. Elmsworth cried out in pain, dropping his own weapon, clutching his wounded arm. Gareth quickly subdued him, binding his hands, ending his resistance. Meanwhile, Tristan and Kaelin continued their duel, their swords clashing, their bodies straining, their faces locked in a grim dance of death. Tristan, fueled by his anger and his grief, slowly gained the upper hand, his strikes more powerful, his movements more precise. He disarmed Kaelin, his sword knocking Kaelin's weapon into the water. Kaelin stood there, defenseless, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with a mixture of defeat and defiance. Tristan raised his sword, ready to deliver the final blow, to end the life of the man who had betrayed him, who had betrayed the king, who had murdered Lyra. But he hesitated. He looked into Kaelin's eyes, and he saw not just hatred and defiance, but also a flicker of regret, a hint of the man he had once known, the man he had once considered a friend. He lowered his sword, unable to bring himself to kill a defenseless man, even one who had committed such terrible crimes. "I won't kill you, Kaelin," Tristan said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "You will face the king's justice. You will answer for your crimes." Kaelin said nothing, his eyes downcast, his body slumped in defeat. The battle was over. Elmswith and Kaelin were captured, their escape foiled, their treachery exposed. As the dawn began to break, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Tristan and Catherine stood together on the deck of the boat, watching as the captured traitors were taken away. The victory was bittersweet. They had stopped Elmsworth and Kaelin, but the cost had been high. Lyra was dead, and Tristan's faith in his fellow man had been shattered. The reckoning had come, but the scars of betrayal would remain. Chapter 20. The Heart's True North. The aftermath of the confrontation on the river was a period of somber reflection and decisive action. Kaelin and Elmswith were brought before the king, their crimes laid bare for all to see. Kaelin, stripped of his knighthood and title, confessed to his involvement with the Shadowed Blade, revealing the names of other conspirators who had managed to remain hidden. Elmsworth, despite his attempts to maintain his innocence, was ultimately found guilty of treason and murder, his sentence sealed by the overwhelming evidence against him. The king, shaken by the depth of the betrayal, particularly by Kaelin's treachery, ordered a sweeping purge of the court, removing anyone suspected of having ties to the Shadowed Blade. He implemented stricter security measures, reformed the royal guard, and established a new council of advisors, composed of individuals whose loyalty had been proven beyond doubt. Tristan, despite his personal pain over Kaelin's betrayal, played a crucial role in the reforms, using his knowledge of the Shadowed Blade's methods and his understanding of courtly intrigue to help root out the remaining conspirators and to establish a more secure and trustworthy government. Catherine, too, was instrumental in the rebuilding process. She used her influence and her intelligence to advocate for justice, for fairness, for a kingdom where the rule of law prevailed over the whims of power. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the victims of the Shadowed Blade's treachery were compensated, that their families were cared for, and that their sacrifices were not forgotten. As the weeks turned into months, the kingdom slowly began to heal. The fear and suspicion that had gripped the court gradually subsided, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and a determination to build a better future. Tristan and Catherine, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured, found solace and strength in each other's love. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged victorious, their love a beacon of hope in a world that had been shrouded in shadows. One spring morning, as the sun streamed through the windows of their chambers in the royal palace, Tristan turned to Catherine, his eyes filled with a deep and abiding love. "Catherine," he said, his voice soft and tender, "we have been through so much together. We have faced danger, betrayal, and loss. But through it all, our love has endured, grown stronger, become the foundation of our lives." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, his touch sending a warmth through her heart. "I know that we have responsibilities, duties to the kingdom," he continued. "But I also know that we need to focus on our own future, on the life we want to build together." He paused, then added, his voice filled with a hopeful anticipation, "Will you marry me, Catherine? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love, for all the days of our lives?" Catherine's heart overflowed with joy, her eyes filling with tears of happiness. She had waited so long to hear those words, to feel the certainty of their love, to know that their future was secure. "Yes, Tristan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. With all my heart, with all my soul, I will be your wife." They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one, their love a promise of a future filled with happiness, with peace, with a shared commitment to justice and to each other. The wedding was a grand affair, held in the royal cathedral, attended by the king, the court, and dignitaries from across the kingdom. Catherine, radiant in a gown of white silk and lace, her father's ring proudly displayed on her finger, walked down the aisle on the arm of her brother, Thomas, who had grown into a strong and capable young man. Tristan, standing at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration, watched her approach, his heart swelling with a joy he had never thought possible. He had found his true north, his guiding star, the woman who had captured his heart, who had challenged him, who had believed in him, even when he had doubted himself. As they exchanged their vows, their voices clear and strong, their eyes locked in a gaze of unwavering love, a sense of peace and fulfillment settled over them. They had overcome the obstacles, the betrayals, the challenges, and they had emerged victorious, their love a testament to the power of forgiveness, of resilience, of the human spirit. After the ceremony, as they stood together, hand in hand, husband and wife, they looked out at the assembled guests, at the faces filled with joy and celebration. They knew that their journey was far from over, that there would be new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they would face them together, with courage, with determination, with a love that would guide them, protect them, and sustain them through all the days of their lives. The heart's true north had been found, and it would lead them, always, towards a future filled with hope, with peace, and with a love that would endure forever. Epilogue. Years passed, seasons turning with the steady rhythm of life in Dunmere. Catherine and Tristan, now Lord and Lady de Clare, ruled wisely and justly, their love a beacon of stability in a kingdom that had once teetered on the brink of chaos. Dunmere flourished under their care, its fields fertile, its people prosperous, its castle a haven of peace and security. Thomas, grown to manhood, served as Tristan's right hand, a skilled warrior and a trusted advisor, his youthful fears replaced by a quiet strength and a deep loyalty to his sister and brother-in-law. Alara, ever faithful, remained at Catherine's side, her friendship a constant source of comfort and support. Gareth, the blacksmith, continued to serve Dunmere, his skill with metal now crafting tools of peace rather than weapons of war. The memory of the shadowed blade, of the treachery and loss they had endured, remained, a somber reminder of the fragility of peace and the constant need for vigilance. But it also served as a testament to their resilience, their courage, and the enduring power of love and loyalty. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun set over the rolling hills of Dunmere, casting a golden glow over the castle walls, Catherine and Tristan stood together on the battlements, their arms wrapped around each other, their hearts filled with a quiet contentment. They had faced many challenges in the years since their wedding, navigated the complexities of courtly politics, dealt with the occasional threat from disgruntled nobles or ambitious rivals. But they had always faced them together, their love a constant source of strength, their shared commitment to justice an unwavering guide. They had been blessed with children, a son and a daughter, who were now growing up in the warmth and security of Dunmere, learning the values of honor, loyalty, and compassion that their parents had so fiercely defended. Catherine looked out at the landscape, at the fields where she had ridden with her father, at the orchard where she had shared stolen moments with Tristan, at the castle that had been her home, her sanctuary, her battleground. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft and filled with a deep sense of peace. Tristan nodded, his eyes following hers.
"It is," he said.
"But not as beautiful as you." Catherine smiled, her heart swelling with love. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her body fitting perfectly against his. "We built this, Tristan," she said. "Together. We created this peace, this security, this happiness." Tristan tightened his arm around her, his hand gently stroking her hair. "We did," he said. "And we will continue to build it, to protect it, for our children, for our people, for as long as we live." They stood there for a long moment, silhouetted against the setting sun, their love a silent testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the ability to overcome adversity, to find hope in the darkness, to build a better future, together. The echoes of the past, the whispers of treachery, the shadows of fallen enemies, had faded, replaced by the warmth of the present, the promise of the future, and the unwavering certainty of their love. The heart's true north had led them home, to Dunmere, to each other, to a life filled with purpose, with peace, and with a love that would endure forever.